Now that we've taken a look at pixels, which give us a way of specifying the size of things in absolute terms, we're going to talk about a couple of important ways of talking about sizes that are relative to other things on the page. And the first one is percentages, which we've looked at briefly already, but these are really important for a variety of cases. But percentages can be a little bit complicated. So we talk about in the text a few of the catches related to percentages.
Right. So the thing that you have to remember is that the percentage sizing is based on the container that the element is in. So when you lay out a page, you need to be aware of how big things are going to be and how small they're going to be. I guess that's the thing that I want to make clear. So you can get in a situation where you have content on the page that gets squished down uncomfortably small if the whole browser gets made smaller or for some reason one element is smaller. Because if you have something that's only taking up 10% of it and then you make everything smaller, everything gets squished. So you just have to pay attention to where you're using it. The other thing is that percentage heights are a little weird. They don't always work quite right. It's complicated why that happens, but
Hmm.
it's because while a percentage width can be unset, so I can make something that takes up 50% of the width, and you don't need to set a width for the parent container. Heights don't work that way. You have to set a height on the parent container. So you'd have to say like the parent container is 200 pixels, and then the child can be 50%, and it'll actually be 50% of the height.
Hmm.
It's just a weird caveat of it. And then the other thing, and we won't really cover it here, but we mention it in the text, which is that you can use percentage for fonts, but it works pretty much just like the M. So we probably aren't going to really go over it right now, just because it is just like the M, but nobody uses it really for this.
Okay.
But the caveat that you have to watch out for is that it's multiplicative. So if you have a set font and then you have inside of that a child that says like 150%, and then inside of that you have another child that's 150%, the last child is going to have absolutely huge font because it's multiplying it twice.
All right, I definitely like to see some concrete examples of this because I'm not entirely clear still on exactly what everything means here with respect to percentages. So what we're going to do here is introduce a new div that wraps all of our bio content. So this is a common theme that we'll continue to develop in this tutorial, which is adding wrappers. And we'll give it a class. And what's the class here? It's a bio wrapper.
Mm-hmm.
And let's indent this here. And we're just going to do everything here, all of these divs down to here, right? Oops, I should have clicked it differently. Here we
And the
go.
reason we're wrapping this right now is because we're going to set percentage values for the width of the bio boxes, but they need to be inside of something
Ah,
so that we can control those widths. Otherwise, if they're not inside of something, it's just based on the next parent container, which in this case would be the body, I think.
okay.
And at that point, you don't want to make the body of the whole page bigger or smaller just for one small aspect of the page.
Right. Okay, so we've got a width of 200 pixels here. We're going to change that to 50%. And
Mm-hmm.
we haven't set the width of the bounding box. So let's take a look at this. If we do, so this is a 200 pixels right here now,
Mm-hmm.
these boxes. So this is now 50% of the page. But what happens if we put in a wrapper here? So this goes up here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the dot for the class, and then our example is a width of 500 pixels. And so that should mean the bio boxes have a width of 50% of that, which is 250 pixels, right?
Correct.
Oh, look at that.
And they're squished.
Yeah, they're squishy. So you mentioned something about how things could get too squished. How does that scenario work?
Well, actually, a good example would be to comment out the width of the bio wrapper
Okay.
and now save it. And when you refresh, the bio boxes will go back to taking up 50% of the space, but
Right.
now decrease the size of the browser.
I'm going to put it in a new window because I don't want to lose the size of this thing here.
So now keep going though. Keep going.
Oh, they really get
Keep going.
squished. Oh man.
This is
So
this is Safari's limit, but some
I see.
browsers go even smaller than that, and so
Yeah.
you could get to a situation where you have like one word on every line, and it just
Uh,
gets squished way down.
right. And so, whereas if we have a fixed width here, 500 pixels for the wrapper,
Right.
it looks like it's pretty much the same.
Well, it just won't
Oh, but
change.
I see it. No, it looks the same because that's just how small it is,
Right. Right.
but it's not a percentage. I see. Yeah. So now we resize it, and it actually doesn't change.
Exactly. So you
I
have a little
got it.
more control when you use a wrapper.
Yeah, I got it. Oh, I see. And that is our example in the text. We actually do just get rid of the style declaration there for
Hmm.
the bio box or for the wrapper, just as a demo. We commented it out like this, but equivalently, we can just get rid of it.
Right.
So this just
And
goes to
empty
show that,
styles are valid. I mean,
right,
it's not going to break anything, but I mean, you just don't want to keep junk in your CSS file. But if you need to,
right.
just because you're going to change something in the future, or you're just making a little spot to remember that you need to style something, it's not going to break your CSS,
Got it,
which is a good thing to know.
for sure. And now our next example talks about the height, and you mentioned that this is pretty tricky. So let's put it in. We actually
Right.
have just a sample div. That
Exactly.
we'll delete this at the end of the section, but this is just to get a sense of how things work. So where does this go in the file? Oh, it's right above the I'm in H1, so just inside the body.
Hmm.
And we're going to use inline styles here just because,
We're deleting the whole thing.
yeah, because we're going to delete it anyway. This is actually a good example of, it's okay to use inline styles, especially if you're just going to do something like this. It's quick and dirty, and it's not worth the overhead of hoisting it into the style sheet here. And as we'll see later on, of course, we'll be factoring this into a separate file. And again, sometimes it's nice just to be able to do it in the same file, and then when you've got the CSS that you want, then you can put it into a separate file. So this is the style equals, and we'll just put it in. So it's got a border, solid black, but we'll use the hex,
Hmm.
the more compact notation. 000 is all zeros, and then I guess we're actually just we can omit this space. I would probably put it in, but the example in the text doesn't have a space, and it doesn't matter. I know, I like spaces. So you can see my habits there, putting in the space. So in a height of, oh yeah, we actually get rid of all the spaces, don't we? That's interesting. This is a good example. I mean, this is driving me crazy because our example in the text is missing the space here, but it doesn't matter. You don't need
Yep.
the space. The colon is enough. So this is actually a good chance for me just to take a deep breath and not worry about it, especially since we're about to delete it.
Yeah, exactly. And so before you refresh the browser after you're done with this,
Okay. Yeah.
we'll just talk. So
Okay.
this test div is sitting inside of the body. And if you switch back to the page, there's a decent amount of content here, right?
Right.
Like it stretches down the page a good distance. You
Hmm.
would expect then that if you go back to the code,
Right. If we say a height
100%
100%,
height, that it's going to be 100% of the height of the window. So
right.
then everything should double. The whole browser window should be pushed down by this.
Yeah. So
But
so
now
when we
when
save
Michael
it,
saves this and refreshes, no.
oh wow, it's just a little one up here at the top.
Right. So the reason for that is that it's not being passed a height by its parent. And
Because its parent is the body tag
its
in this
parent is the
case.
body, and there's no absolute value on the height of
Okay.
that. And percentage heights need a height to work off of.
Okay.
It's
So
a weird thing. Otherwise, it just
yeah.
fits it to the content that's within the element that it's on.
So we can do something like this, though. Put in the body tag with a particular height, say 800 pixels. So now this should be another 800 pixels, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
right? So
And there you
yeah,
go.
look at that. So if we scroll down, we can see
So
that.
just a weird little caveat
Yeah.
with it. It's just one of those things where you'd imagine it would work one way, and then you try it, and it doesn't.
Right. So apparently this can get quite complicated. We have
Yes.
some examples. We see that it seems like there are strange interactions or between the percent height and other elements on the page.
Yeah, it doesn't always work exactly like you'd expect because it's not basing it on the window. Like a lot of times, if you just had an element on the page in the middle of the body, you would expect it to be based off of the dimensions of the window, but it's not.
Hmm.
It's always looking for parent elements.
Okay.
And because of that, you get weird interactions where, like, say the parent element has a bunch of padding on it, then the height of your element that's inside of that is going to include the padding as well as the height of the object. It gets a little crazy.
Okay,
So,
so do people typically not use percentage for heights? Do they avoid that and use alternatives?
yeah, typically.
Okay, and so we'll be talking about those then, right? We've got
Right. Yeah. We have some more examples of some other measures that are used. And
okay.
also, just in general, you'll find yourself not using height values a whole lot. And the reason for that is that with the web, when you constrain something's height, if for some reason the width of it gets smaller, the way that we squished these boxes,
Mm-hmm.
if the height were constrained, the text would push outside of the box.
Ah,
So a lot of times you create stuff where you don't want to set height for it because you don't want the content to break the box.
got it.
It's something we'll look at in the future when we talk about overflow is what this is called.
Mm-hmm.
So the times that you actually need to set a height for something, you tend to want to be more precise because you're actually creating something where you want to know that it's always going to be these dimensions so that it doesn't cause a weird layout.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that generally percentages are most commonly used in widths? Is that right?
I would, yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of times when you're designing things that will maybe be used for mobile or something like that, where like you might want a responsive design that can be on a variety of screen sizes, you'll use a percentage to just say, I want it to take up half the screen or half the space. Yeah.
Okay. And there's one more comment that we made in the text about the usage of percentages for fonts. And we mentioned this briefly at the beginning of this section. But so we were talking about how technically you can use percentages for fonts, but people generally don't because they're essentially equivalent to M's, which are really more designed for that. Is that
Right,
right?
because it's not based on this. Here's another weird thing where it's not based on the size of the container. So when we changed this body, the body on the page to be 800 pixels like this, if you gave a font that was in here a height of 100%, it wouldn't be 800 pixels tall. It actually bases it off of whatever the font size is for the parent container. So in this case, it would be whatever the font size is for the body, which, because we haven't set one, it would be the browser default of 16 pixels.
Okay.
So it's counterintuitive because you would think like, oh, my parent container is 800 pixels tall. If I sent the font to be font size 100%, it should be 800 pixels tall, but it's not. It's based off this totally other thing, the font size. And that's exactly how M's work. And so most people just use M's.
Okay. And that, in fact, is our next topic. So that'll work great. Before we move on, though, let's get rid of this test div. Let's double check here. There we go. And is this what we've got for now? Do we want to keep the bio wrapper empty? I think we do keep it
Mm-hmm.
empty. So we'll keep this empty for now. It'll give us an option, though, to fill it in later on.
Yeah.